Hey, I am so glad to see you. I'm Kimberly Dark, and this is the Hope Desk. And, for those who don't know, I'm a writer and a sociologist and a storyteller, and I have some simple answers for you about some of your questions regarding social inequality. I say your questions because the questions do come from people who send them to me, or topics they want to discuss. And so feel free to either send me messages through social media or in the chat box, even if you have an idea for what to discuss in the future. So I just want to point out, I don't have all the answers. I don't have the only right answers, but I am spending this time with you each week doing what I can to address a few issues that folks say they would like to hear about. And why are we doing this? It is because, to my mind, it is hopeful if more people feel like they know enough to be able to join in public discourse about the things that influence our lives. And let's face it, there's a lot happening, right? So I'm not here to offer in-depth scholarship on any of these topics either. In most cases, other people are more qualified than I am to do that, but I am going to offer you resources every time we are together. Um, and I'm doing this as your friendly neighborhood sociologist, right? We have a perspective on the architecture of everyday life that can be helpful. So I am here to do my small part. And I am going to ask you for questions, but feel free also to write them in the chat box if you would like to. And I also super appreciate Emily, our tech facilitator. Today, we are talking about coming out. Is it still important? What is it? And then the second is a question that I received. Why didn't marriage equality solve the problem of LGBT discrimination? Oh, if only that had been true, right? So, listen, this question about coming out came up because recently there was this thing called Lesbian Visibility Day. And someone asked if this was still important, right? Because, I mean, right, aren't lesbians visible already? I want to say yes, visibility is still important, and I'm going to share with you in a little while why this question is actually related to the second one as well. So here's the thing about coming out. Coming out does a number of things, and look, it might be true that you see gay people, lesbian people on television now. I mean, there are plenty of folks who, like, you look and you go, yes, oh, Anderson Cooper, he's a newscaster and he also is a gay person. Okay, but there is a thing that happens when we only see representatives um, in two-dimensional form, is that we start to think about people in two-dimensional ways. So, um, coming out as complex, right? Whether that means you're gay or whether it means you're polyamorous or whether it means you own a goat or whether it means you go to a nudist camp or whether it means who knows what, it means that people see the diversity in your life. And it also means that stigma, right? Like, what do we think about goat owners? Stigma can break down just a little bit. It means that fear of goat owners, for instance, can break down just a little bit. It means that people find it harder to stereotype, right? It also means that people can find one another. So, like, let's say, for instance, like Lesbian Visibility Day, like, let's say, for instance, that someone is a lesbian and is experiencing discrimination at work, but that person doesn't know who to talk to about that. If it is possible to see other people who also may have experienced these issues, then that person can, get together and hopefully find some resources. So being able to find one another and organize against inequality is still not a small thing. I want to point out to you, and Emily can share a link with you in the chat box. I have an actual book to recommend to you. This is a book by Abigail Sagay, and it is called Come Out, Whoever You Are. This is a really good book, and it's with an academic press, but it's qualitative research. It's extremely readable. And the link I'm sharing with you is actually a book review I wrote about this book. And what she does in this book that is so brilliant, I think, is to look at very different groups of people who have used coming out as a political strategy to draw attention to their own community discrimination, or their own the stigma attached to their identities. So this is a, the title is riffing on something Harvey Milk said. And some of you may know Harvey Milk, right? He was a city council member in San Francisco and was also assassinated, unfortunately, in that role. He was the first openly gay. And when I say openly gay, I mean he used his gayness as a campaign strategy, as a political strategy, in order to build coalitions and increase human rights. So he's a significant figure in American civil rights. And the coming out strategy was explicit, right? That if, and so his one of his campaign strategies was come out wherever you are. And that was used to combat a measure that was on the California ballot at the time to keep gay people from teaching in public schools. It didn't pass, right? And part of that was because more and more people started to come out and say, look, I am a gay person. I am also, a member of my community in this way. I am also a good third grade teacher. I am also a, fill in the blank. So people were at tremendous risk to do this in the 70s. Let's not forget that homosexuality had just recently been decriminalized and what's the word? When it stopped being seen as a mental health diagnosis. That had just happened not too long before. And so people were at great risk to do this, but it came to be a way, a strategy to help humanize folks. So listen, Abigail Sagai's book is taking that as the precedent, but then also looking at how other movements have used coming out. So one of the movements she looks at is the hashtag Me Too movement. That is a stigmatized identity still for a woman to say, I was raped, I was sexually assaulted, I endured incest, any of these kind of sexual abuse scenarios. So yes, coming out is important for that situation. It helps people mobilize. It helps people complicate those identities so that no one is looking at those folks, hopefully, and saying, oh, that is a damaged person. She also looks at coming out as fat. Now, this seems like, why would you need to do that? This is a topic I've written about in my last book, Fat, Pretty, and Soon to Be Old. And my next book coming up is called Damaged Like Me, in part because of these things that we're talking about, the need to be seen as complex and competent if people view you as damaged is part of what my next book is about. So check it out. There's this thing I do actually when I teach a course sometimes called Body and Identity. And when I teach that course in person in the classroom, I always have this little moment at the beginning of class because one of the books we read is Amy Farrell's Fat Shame. So we talk about fatness as one form of body and identity. And I always say at the beginning of class, look, I want you to know that I know that you have a fat professor. Now, obviously, somebody can look at me and see that I'm fat. But, and by the way, fat here is a neutral descriptive term. Yeah, not an insult word. So somebody can look at me and see that. But what happens when I come out as fat is that I make it a topic that is okay to talk about. I also make it a topic that we are going to talk about in civil, constructive terms. think about how important this is, right? To take a topic that people sometimes make jokes about, that people sometimes make insults about, and to say, no, no, this is a topic that is important to discuss as critical analysis, and we are going to do it in constructive, respectful terms. So in this book, she also talks about coming out as undocumented. I mean, think of the risks that are involved in that. Like a person could literally be deported if they are known to be an undocumented immigrant. But what is so important about coming out, this is another benefit here, is that it alleviates fear and helps people who truly are invisible because of their vulnerability. It helps them connect. Alleviating fear is huge because it changes the way we live our lives. So if there were ever anyone where you think, gosh, I am free and open about my identity to everyone except this person, that is a person who holds power over you. And maybe you would like to reclaim that power. So coming out is important in all of these ways and humanizing. Oh, she also talks about the political gains that have been made specifically in the state of Utah when polygamous people come out. Now, not just polyamorous, but people who want to be married to more than one person, right? And we know in the US that has been more prevalent in the state of Utah because that is where the most Mormon people live, and there is a history of Mormon men having more than one wife, even though many in the regular Church of Latter-day Saints don't accept that behavior any longer. There is that diversity in larger supply in the state of Utah. So yeah, there are some problems with coming out, and I want to point out a couple of those because I fear that sometimes, especially with LGBT rights, we get into a place where we love coming out stories, but I don't think they go far enough, and I think sometimes they are problematic. So I want to just say a little bit about that too. First of all, coming out as a story, right? Especially because we've been doing it in the LGBTQ community for a long time now, it can create monolithic identities. Here's how it goes. So I was closeted and I was sad and depressed and people abused me and, I didn't have self-esteem. And then my life was a lie, but then I found the personal strength and I came out. And then now I have open relationships and, people respect me and things are good. Okay, that's great. And there are stories that look like that. But there are so many stories that are more complex than that. Stories where people had great relationships with people of the opposite sex, for instance, before they came out. But they, came out and now they have different relationships. But there's no need to invalidate those ones that happened beforehand, right? So I think we have to pay attention to the push to create monolithic identities, especially when those are monolithic identities that make us seem really normal. Now, normal according to what? According to social norms and standards. Do you see how I am about to segue into the conversation about marriage by talking about this? Because focusing LGBT rights on the institution of marriage was a way to make us seem normal. That, women still want to have the long white dress and a certain kind of wedding, and some of them happen to be lesbians. People still want to have 2 kids and a car and a house. It's just that some of them are gay. This is problematic, my friends, right? So I think that we need to not approach coming out as a way to cleave more tightly to normalcy, but rather as a way to complicate and render complex the truth of American relationships and lives and identities. Also, the call to come out kind of presupposes that this kind of an action is in itself transformative. And I think that's not true. We still have to be able to organize. We still have to be able to make political changes that actually change the rights that are available to people, right? Just coming out actually is going to make you vulnerable in certain situations. So it's not by itself transformative, even though it might be, right? It might be. And also, of course, that the identity one publicly declares is not unambiguous. It's still, we still are complex and messy people, right? So just to wrap up this topic, the primary thing that people get with coming out, these various movements, no matter who you are, is, look, if somebody believes that they don't know anyone who is a rape survivor or who is gay or who is an undocumented immigrant, suddenly they do. And they have to acknowledge that those are real, respectable human beings. It's very easy to make up terrible stories about those people who are taboo somehow. But this is something that coming out does. It makes it harder to do that. So yeah, as soon as one knows someone who has a plural marriage or is willing to talk about harassment or any of that, they can never rely on ignorance and lies again, and they can or help organize and become stronger allies. So I would like to know, and maybe Emily, if you give them the opportunity to unmute if they would like to, I want to just stop right there and see if anyone has questions or comments about the topic of coming out.
Yeah, I turned off the mute lock. So are folks able to unmute themselves? And it's just that no one has anything to say on this topic?
It is okay if you don't have something to say. I know
Okay.
that sometimes you're just still thinking about it. This is why you can also use the chat box as we go.
Okay.
I just want to make sure I'm not talking over anyone's desires to speak. All right. We've got some agreement that this is important in the chat box. Thank you for your witness as well as your questions. So let's just move on to this question about, hey, why didn't marriage equality solve the issue about LGBT rights? Check it out. This is actually two questions, isn't it? The two questions are, what is marriage? Like, what does it do socially and politically? And then the second question is, how does a stigmatized identity shed its stigma, become no longer a stigmatized identity, right? How does that happen? So these two questions are related in this this topic that we're talking about, but they're not the same thing, and then that's part of the answer. So let me just say that first of all, we think of marriage as something totally normal in the life cycle, but that is only because that is what our culture has been organized around for a very long time. And not just US culture, but Christianity. Oh, but wait, we are not just a Christian nation. We have freedom of religion, except hang on, so much of our political norms and standards are Christian norms and standards. So we have to handle the fact that marriage is a thing. Specifically, the idea that you get to a certain age and you have an urge to marry someone of the opposite sex and have babies. Specifically that, and then live together for the rest of your lives, raise those children, enjoy your grandchildren, and die happy. Specifically, that trajectory is deeply inscribed in our culture and in Christianity. So Marriage organizes culture and conveys what the society values in some very specific ways. So, just the fact that marriage is recognized by the state is proof of this. So, think this through. What if marriage was simply a thing that you did because you want to, but it actually has nothing to do? Well, you don't register it with the state, you don't get a marriage license, you don't get tax breaks, all of those over 1,000 benefits that come with being married according to the state. Like, we could do it that other way, where, the state just doesn't care whether you're living with one person or two people or no people, right? They just don't care. So there are those who would say that that's actually what we should have done, was abolish marriage as a state sanctioned benefit rather than trying to include same sex marriage under the umbrella. We could talk a lot more about that, and maybe you want to put that as a topic for a future Hope Desk, but I'm not going to dig too deep into that right now. I just want to point out that marriage itself organizes culture and conveys what the society values. Same deal with giving tax credits for having children. Both reinforce religion as well as the family structure. This is part of why the rules are so hard to change. So, focusing on marriage equality was an exceptional way not to gain LGBTQ, etc. rights, so much as to render gay and lesbian people normal. Do you notice what I just did there? Gay and lesbian people get to be seen as more normal. The B and the T there in the big gay sandwich. Bisexuals aren't really seen as more normal. Transgender folks are not really seen as more normal. So part of your answer to this question has to do with the fact that helping gay and lesbian people who wish to marry to seem more like straight heterosexual Americans who wish to marry does not do a whole lot, actually, for LGBTQII2 rights. No? But it is a brilliant way to normalize millions of people. So let's just focus on what did marriage equality do, because I do think that it propelled our human rights forward, right? But not completely, and not in exactly the ways that a lot of people believe. So, focusing on marriage was an exceptional way to reveal queer, well, gay and lesbian at least, folks as normal. But that isn't the full story. So those who have been most punished and continue to be most punished of the LGBTQII2 spectrum are those who are non-gender conforming. Think about this. Think about this for a minute, right? If a car pulls up at a crosswalk and somebody is walking across the crosswalk, they don't know each other, and the person yells out of the car at the person walking in the crosswalk, "Faggot," pardon me if that word is deeply offensive to you, what is that individual in the truck looking at? They're not seeing two men having sex in the crosswalk. Chances are what they are seeing is someone who looks gender non-conforming. A man who looks visibly gay in a crosswalk, chances are, even if they're not, I'm not saying that individual is trying to look female. I'm saying that individual is not conforming to maleness in a way that is visible. That is the person who has always been punished, brutalized, murdered, not hired, not even, let me just point out, not even on gay dating sites is that person the most popular gay person. This is important, right? because a whole lot of internalized homophobia happens where, a man might say, no twinks, right? Or masculine only. So this individual is gay, but the bigger issue is not appearing appropriately masculine according to the culture. Why is this important? This is important because those who are gender nonconforming have long borne the brunt of our society's hatred toward LGBTQII2 people. This continues to be so. And to my mind, until all folks who are under that, alphabet umbrella have equal human rights, are seen in their full dignity, we have a problem. We have a big problem. And taking out a giant chunk of folks and saying these people are now seen as normal because they want to get married is a little bit of its own problem. Because at least when all queer folks were seen as freaks and deviants, at least we had larger numbers. So check it out. You may not know this about me, but I am queer. And look, I am gender conforming. I am queer in a way that does not get me punished in the crosswalk. We already talked about this. The most visible thing that I might be punished for in the crosswalk is somebody calling me a fat bitch. It would be being fat and gender that would make me punishable from a stranger. So I hope these examples are help making clear. Hope the answer to the question we are focused on right now is, becoming clear like in the magic 8-ball. It is floating to the surface. So yes, the irony, of course, is that those who gender nonconform have been the forefront of equal rights because they're visible, perhaps visibly beaten in the streets, but visible. And I think that we owe them our allegiance in the past, those people who came before us. And we also owe everyone who is alive with us here today our solidarity and acknowledgement of their inviolable human dignity. Folks, the crux of this is that we have to learn to love and respect bodies and identities that we weren't taught were lovable. And that means protecting the rights of those whose behaviors you might find unsavory, to live free and respectable, unsavory lives, in your opinion. Marriage is something we all understand. And so, yay, you can see, two slender white women in wedding dresses on top of a cake, and you can understand that it is still the same American cultural fantasy, even if it's two women or if it's two men. So what will help dismantle stigma? I do think that marriage equality is doing some of that work. I do. I think actually there is something happening in American culture that is doing more work right now and is a bigger public service, and that is the explosion of non-binary identities. It's a great public service right now. Disrupting any binary is a good move, but especially the one that says there is a right way to have a body, there is a right way to love a person, there's a right way to be in a family. Oh, we got to disrupt that shit like mad. We have to disrupt that like mad. So it's also great, here's another public service, that groups of people other than LGBT folks are questioning marriage itself. Do you know, for instance, that there is a trend toward multiple parentage being acknowledged legally? So again, we could go the route of simply not needing legal acknowledgement of family structures, but since we're not going that route, inclusion seems like a good thing. So this is a thing that a lot of people can understand, right? The need, for instance, for 3 people to be legal parents. For instance, my son, who is polyamorous, but that's actually not salient to this example, but he has a child who is not biologically his. He shares parenting with the child's mother, with whom he was romantically involved but isn't any longer. Think about that. There are a lot of people in this situation. And then also the child's biological father. So, wouldn't it be handy, since the three of them are involved in everyday parenting of my grandson, wouldn't it be handy if there were legal recognition of their family? So, that is happening in certain places as a result of folks questioning, does this actually work for human family forms? Do these legalities work? And in a lot of ways, three legal parents might be less shocking than three legal sex partners who want to marry. Right? There are also now, because of marriage equality, of same sex marriage, there are also now people getting married without sex involved. Friends who are not sexual partners who are saying, we want to form a family. We want to have the legal protections of a family. So that is also a disruption that was not sort of a planned upon thing that happened as a result of marriage equality. And I think those things are doing a lot of good work as well. So, folks, the bottom line here, and what I would like to say about marriage and why it doesn't solve that problem, is that it is a way for the government to sanction certain relationships. The fact is, the government should not be so much controlling which families are valid as responding to how do people in the US make families. I think this is actually an aim that we would all get behind, is that we want every child protected, cared for, fed, loved, and raised to be a benefit to society. So that is actually where the focus of governmental involvement in things like marriage and parenting needs to be. Either that, or they should stay out of it entirely and not give benefits to some people and not others. Absolutely, gay marriage has helped in the same way that ending laws against interracial marriage helped the civil rights movement based on race. Did it solve racism? Hell no, because here we are still in a white supremacist culture trying to work that through. But absolutely, when it stopped being illegal for people of different races to marry in the US, which, folks, wasn't very long ago, it really helped. So, better still would be respecting everyone's individual choices and appearances. We should be worried about ethically endorsing every bit of relationship and experimental intimacy that consenting adults can come up with, and then it wouldn't be related to gender or numbers or what kind of sex or no sex people are having. Yeah, that would be a better thing still. But all of those things I just mentioned are going to be super helpful. I hope that helps answer that question, and I would love to hear from anyone who has questions or comments about either of these themes. And Emily can share an article with you that is actually about marriage, not about marriage equality and that fight, but pardon me, there's hair blowing in my face since I'm outside. The article is from the New Yorker, maybe last month, and it's about marriage differences, and super interesting. So,
if anyone wants to say anything, go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll spotlight you.
I'm looking in the chat, and there's also a comment here on Detransition Baby, which is a book, I believe, which explores a lot of these themes. Thank you for recommending that, Lizzie. Written by Tori Peters. Excellent addendum.
I'm scanning through. I don't see anyone on camera or with hands up. Could you send me the link to the review by Kimberly? Oh, that's sorry. I was reading a direct message. Yes, I can do that for you, Claire.
So, folks, a lot of the Hope Desk episodes from the past are now available on YouTube. And maybe Emily could even find that link. I didn't give it to her ahead of time. But there is a link for the Hope Desk episodes. They don't all come out really well because of, varying internet quality or who knows what. So we post the ones that we can. I still think of this as a live event, because hopefully, well, because it is, here we are, we're live. But if you would like to look at any of the past topics that I've dealt with, you can do that online as well. And I'm just going to consider now that your questions about coming out and about why marriage equality was not the be all end all for human rights. I'm going to assume that your questions on these topics have been answered. And there in the chat box now is the YouTube link if you would like to see any of the other topics.